He stumbled into the room, his face flushed and his eyes glazed over. "Aaron, why haven't you mowed the lawn yet?" "I was just finishing up my homework, Dad. I was going to go and cut it next. I just need to finish this assignment, as it's due tomorrow." "Homework? This is worthless. You think you're going to be somebody with this crap?" He then grabbed the notebook I was writing in and ripped it up and threw the pieces of it in my face. It had taken me over 5 hours to finish, and now it was in shreds. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my temper in check, as I knew any kind of outburst from me would only make things worse. "I'll mow the lawn now." I stood up and headed for the back door, but before I could get there, he grabbed me by the arm and pulled me back. "You think you can just walk away when I'm talking to you?" He grabbed my arm as I tried to head outside to cut the grass, his fingers digging into my arm. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, and it made me feel sick. "Let go of me. You're hurting my arm." He stared at me for a moment, shocked that I had the nerve to talk back. Then, without warning, he slapped me across the face, hard enough to make me see stars. "Don't you ever raise your voice to me? Now get out there and do your chores, and so help me. If you do a poor job, I'll beat you until you can't see straight." Hi there, my name is Aaron, and I was 15 when I ran away from home. I had thought about it countless times before, but it had always felt like some distant, impossible dream. That day, though, it was like a switch flipped inside me. I knew I had to leave if I ever wanted a chance at something different, something better. You see, my grandmother died the day I was born. You might be wondering why I mention this. It's because my grandmother often helped my parents financially. When she passed away and I was born, I was seen as bad luck, as my parents blamed me for her death. My parents were the kind of people who shouldn't have been parents. My dad, Ron, was a massive bully. He was loud, violent, and very unpredictable. He was never happy and was always like at any moment he could lash out, and usually for no reason at all. It really didn't take much to set him off. If I dropped a glass and accidentally broke it, he would hit me with his belt. If I didn't cut the grass the way he preferred it cut, I would get the belt. I honestly think he just enjoyed hitting me and would use almost any excuse in order to do so. And my mom, Teresa, wasn't much better. She didn't hit me, but she took special joy in saying hurtful things and damaging my confidence until there was almost nothing left. She would constantly say I was ugly or stupid, and that no matter what I did in life, that I would always be a loser. If you ask me, the pain she inflicted was so much worse than what my father did. The scars that she created have lasted much longer than the ones from my father's belt, that's for sure. The worst part was, they saved their worst for when we were alone. To the rest of the world, they were model parents. At church, they'd smile and shake hands, and people would tell them what a handsome son they had. Dad would slap me on the back and beam like he was proud, and Mom would fuss over me like I was the center of her world. But at home, it was a different story. One of the last straws came on a Saturday afternoon. Dad had spent the morning drinking, his favorite weekend pastime. I was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to finish up my homework. He stumbled into the room, his face flushed and his eyes glazed over. "Aaron, why haven't you mowed the lawn yet?" "I was just finishing up my homework, Dad. I was going to go and cut it next. I just need to finish this assignment, as it's due tomorrow." "Homework? This is worthless. You think you're going to be somebody with this crap?" He then grabbed the notebook I was writing in and ripped it up and threw the pieces of it in my face. It had taken me over 5 hours to finish, and now it was in shreds. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my temper in check, as I knew any kind of outburst from me would only make things worse. "I'll mow the lawn now." I stood up and headed for the back door, but before I could get there, he grabbed me by the arm and pulled me back. "You think you can just walk away when I'm talking to you?" He grabbed my arm as I tried to head outside to cut the grass, his fingers digging into my arm. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, and it made me feel sick. "Let go of me. You're hurting my arm." He stared at me for a moment, shocked that I had the nerve to talk back. Then, without warning, he slapped me across the face, hard enough to make me see stars. "Don't you ever raise your voice to me? Now get out there and do your chores, and so help me. If you do a poor job, I'll beat you until you can't see straight." I knew that his threat was a genuine one. My face was already sore and stung where he had slapped me, and I knew there'd be a bruise by morning. But I didn't care. I'd had enough. That wasn't the first time that he had hit me, but I decided then and there that that would be the last time. I turned and walked out the door, ignoring his shouts behind me. I went straight to my room, grabbing my backpack and shoving in whatever I could find. Clothes, some cash I'd saved from odd jobs, and anything else of value that would fit. At 15. As I crept out of the house that night, I glanced back one last time. I wasn't going to miss it. The first few months on my own were rough. I slept in parks, on benches, in abandoned buildings, anywhere I could find a spot where no one would bother me. I scrounged for food, did whatever odd jobs I could find. It was hard, but I had my freedom, and that was worth every hardship. Eventually, I found work at a construction site. The foreman, Mike, saw something in me, I guess. Maybe he could tell that I was desperate for a chance. He taught me the ropes, and soon enough, I was making decent money. It felt good to be earning something for myself, to know that every dollar I had was mine and mine alone. I worked my way up from there. After a few years, I started my own small construction company. I hired people like me, folks who just needed a chance to prove themselves. I made a name for myself in the industry, took on bigger projects, and soon enough, I was running one of the most respected construction firms in the city. I had an apartment in a high-rise, a nice car, a decent life. I'd come a long way from that scared kid who ran away with nothing but a backpack. But just when I thought I had left my past behind, it came crashing back into my life. It was a Tuesday morning when I got the call. I was sitting in my office, going over some plans for a new project, when my secretary buzzed in.
Mr. Aaron, there's a woman on the line. Says her name is Teresa. She claims to be your mother.
The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't spoken to my parents since I left, hadn't even thought about them in years. I was curious what it was that they wanted after all these years. After all, they had never once tried to contact me even once until now. You would think that maybe they would have called the police at least and reported me missing, but nope, nothing of the sort. They cared that little for me. Put her through.
Aaron, is that you?
What do you want, Teresa?
Oh, honey, don't be like that. It's disrespectful to call your mother by her first name. But listen, honey, I've missed you. We've both missed you.
You missed me? Is that why you let Dad treat me like garbage? Is that why you looked the other way every time he hit me? After all the malicious things you said about me, do you honestly think I believe that you two monsters missed me? There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear her breathing, slow and measured. She wasn't used to me talking back, and I could tell that doing so had struck a nerve. She was doing her best not to lash out at me.
Your father and I, we made mistakes. But we've changed, Aaron. We're different now. We've done a lot of soul searching, and we want you to know how sorry we are for the way we treated you. And Aaron, darling, we need your help.
Help? What kind of help could you possibly need from me?
It's your father. He's sick, Aaron. He's really sick. The doctors say it's cancer. We can't afford the treatment, and, well, we don't have anyone else to turn to.
I felt a cold satisfaction settle over me. They needed me now. After all the years of abuse, all the nights I spent wondering if I'd make it to morning, they had the audacity to ask me for help. I'll think about it. Why don't you and Dad come by my office tomorrow? We can talk then.
Oh, thank you, Aaron. You have no idea how much this means to us. Goodbye.
The next day, they arrived at my office, looking older and more worn down than I remembered. My father was hunched over, a shadow of the man he used to be. Mom was clinging to his arm, her face pinched and pale. I knew that they assumed I would feel sorry for them, seeing them so frail, but it only made me more annoyed with them. After all, they had stolen away my childhood with their abuse, and now here they were, trying to financially steal away from adulthood. Aaron, you look good. I didn't respond. Instead, I motioned for them to sit down, leaning back in my chair as I watched them. They looked uncomfortable, like they didn't belong here. And of course they didn't. So, you need my help. What makes you think I even should consider doing so?
Aaron, please, we know we weren't the best parents. We made mistakes, but we're still family.
Family? Is that what you call what we had? It's taken years to undo the pain you two demons put me through. Both of them looked incredibly uncomfortable, and I could only assume the reason that they hadn't already left showed just how desperate they both were. My dad just glared at me, his eyes cold and hard. He didn't like being the one begging. He was used to being in control. We're desperate, Aaron. If you can't do this for us, then just say it. But we thought maybe you had some decency left. Decency? I'll tell you what, I'll give you the money. But there's a condition. Condition? What kind of condition? I want you to sign a document. It says that once you take my money, that both of you will do several very public announcements telling people about what you did to me. That you will go in front of the congregation of your church and announce just how evil you both were and are.
You can't be serious. That will ruin our reputation.
Well, it's up to you. What's more important? Your life or your reputation? Oh, come on, Aaron, we weren't that bad. How can you make us do something so cruel? Yes, you were. For crying out loud, Dad, I have scars on my body from where you hit me, and I spent years in therapy to stop feeling worthless and rejected. You two deserve so much worse. The least you can do is tell the truth. Let the world know who you really are. And if you don't do the announcements, and I do mean all of them, then you won't get 1 red cent from me. They exchanged a look, and for a moment, I thought they might refuse. But then Mom nodded, reaching out to take the pen from my desk.
Fine, we'll do it. We'll do.
They signed the papers, then left without another word, and I watched them go, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. I had taken control, turned the tables. They needed my money desperately, and I knew that if they went back on their word, that my lawyers would see to it that they would regret doing so. Over the next few months, I witnessed them living up to their part of the arrangement. They announced to their church the way they had treated me, and the truth of why I had ran away. When they were done talking, the priest was so shocked that he suspended them from the church. After that, they went on social media and kept repeating the stories about what they did to me, and they acknowledged the pain that it had caused. I knew they didn't actually regret anything, and they were still the same monsters that they had always been, but it was enough for their reputations to tank. People that had been friends with them all their lives turned on them and ostracized them. They quickly became pariahs in the community, and no one wanted anything to do with them. I took a dark satisfaction with knowing that they had committed social suicide, and all to just get some money. Ironically, though, a few months later, I heard that Dad had passed away. My mom tried to reach out to me again. I answered the call, and she begged for money. I refused unless she mowed my lawn. Shamelessly, she did, and I paid her for a day's work. The next day, when she came back to continue, the guards stopped her, and when she tried calling me, I didn't respond and blocked her number. I later heard that thieves broke into their house and stole most of the money they had saved, leaving my mom penniless. She ended up working for a garbage disposal company in her old age. Serves her right. I'd spent so many years letting their actions define me, letting their cruelty shape who I was. But now, I was the one in control. I had built a life for myself, a life that they could never touch. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.
It's not fair. How could you take him from us? Our kids are still so young. Because of you, they're going to grow up without a father. Are you happy? Are you satisfied?
I began to cry too. I nearly fainted because everyone in the courtroom held nothing but hatred in their eyes for me. The crying woman in front of me made me regret every single bad action I made. The judge quickly read out the charges and the sentences. It was as if he wanted to get rid of me as fast as he could. I was sentenced to life in prison. I saw my parents crying silently. I knew I disappointed them in the worst way. As for the damage to my spine, it meant I would never fully recover. Hi there, my name is Salim. I'm 27 years old, and I'm serving a life sentence in prison. You might wonder what could lead a young man like me to spend the rest of his life behind bars. To be honest, it all boils down to a string of reckless decisions that I made along the way. I grew up in a loving Muslim household with my parents. They did everything they could to give me a comfortable life. From the moment I was born, it was clear I was their pride and joy. I lived in a spacious, well-furnished home, attended the best schools, and wore clothes that were always in style. My parents spared no expense to ensure I had the best of everything. Being their last child, I was their little prince. They showered me with affection and gifts, and it was no secret that I was their favorite. My siblings, who were older and had seen the same level of care and attention fade as they grew up, often voiced their frustrations. They felt neglected compared to the attention and privileges I received. But my parents were unwavering. They saw me as their final chance to relive their parenting glory, and they were determined to make the most of it. I was their baby, and they made sure everyone knew it. They didn't hold back and indulged me in ways that were both obvious and extravagant. It was as if they wanted to prove to the world, and perhaps to themselves, that they were giving me everything they could, perhaps to make up for any regrets they might have had with their other children. I didn't realize it at the time, but this constant stream of indulgence was shaping me in ways that would eventually lead to my downfall. Looking back, I can see how their well-intentioned pampering fostered a sense of entitlement in me. It led to a life where I felt invincible and beyond the reach of consequences. As a teenager, I was the embodiment of rebellion. My parents had worked so hard to give me everything, yet I threw it all away with reckless abandon. I hung out with a group of friends who were as lost as I was. We spent our days and nights smoking, partying, and even harassing girls. Breaking rules and being rebels was thrilling. My friends and I would rather gather in rooms, inhaling unhealthy smoke, than do something better for ourselves. We avoided our prayers. Matter of fact, our religion as a whole. We laughed and joked about our exploits. It felt like we were invincible, living in a bubble of our own making. The thrill of partying all night, defying curfews, and ignoring the consequences was intoxicating. I would come home in the early hours of the morning, my clothes reeking of smoke, my head spinning from the night's excesses. My parents would be waiting for me, their faces etched with worry and disappointment. They often tried to reach out to me, to pull me back from the edge, but I was too caught up in my own world to listen.
This isn't how we raised you, Salim. Why are you hurting us? We never made you sad, so why are you doing this to us?
I could always see the hurt in her eyes, and a part of me would feel guilty. But because I felt I was doing the right thing and simply enjoying my teenage years, I would try to make her understand. I'm just hanging out with friends, Mom. You don't understand. It's just how we do things. Times have changed. This is how we have fun now.
Salim, this isn't fun. You're destroying your life and betraying your religion. Son, we're worried about you. This behavior isn't who you are. It's not the path we've worked so hard to set for you.
I knew they were disappointed and concerned. I knew they truly wanted the best for me, but at that time, I thought I was doing the right thing, and they should understand me. I get it, Dad, but you don't understand. My friends, they get me. They're my world. You should understand me too. I know you both want the best for me, but you should trust me to take care of myself. I know what's best for me. Despite my parents' heartfelt pleas, I continued down my destructive path. My mother soon noticed that I'd stopped attending prayers, much to her dismay. She tried countless times to force me to pray with her, but it never worked. My mind wasn't prepared to pray anymore. One night, after a particularly wild party, I found myself in a situation that wasn't really new, but it landed me in trouble. We were in the park, and a few of my friends began harassing a group of girls. They were making crude jokes and pushing boundaries, and I, caught up in the moment, joined in. We'd beaten one of the girls up and left her there without caring about what the consequences would be. Unfortunately for us, we were caught. The area had CCTV cameras around, and her father was in the police force. My friends and I were arrested and locked up in the police custody. My parents were devastated when they heard the news. They and my siblings rushed to the police station to see me. As I looked at them, I felt ashamed to see their looks of hurt. I saw my mom go on her knees to beg the girl's father because he refused to grant us bail. My dad begged for days. My siblings ensured to bring me food and also assure me that they'd get me out. Eventually, my parents' pleading paid off, and I was released. My other friends were also released because my parents had begged on their behalf since their own parents had given up on them and abandoned them. When we got home, my mom burst into tears. My dad was visibly broken. For the first time in my life, I saw my dad cry. And it was because of me. I resolved to change my ways. I wanted to do better for my parents because they deserved it. They didn't deserve to be getting hurt by me all the time. I stopped speaking to my friends. I reduced smoking because I couldn't just stop. I began eating healthy food. I also begged my mom to teach me how to pray again, and she was more than happy to do so. I saw my family smile happily again whenever they saw me. Their happiness motivated me to do even better. Unfortunately, that didn't last too long. My friends came over to see me one day, and that was the beginning of another rebellion. They told me about their plan to rob a bank. I was hesitant at first because I'd never stolen anything before. I knew my friends often broke into people's houses to steal things sometimes, but I was never part of them. I did all other things, but that's too dangerous. I can't do it. In fact, I'm turning a new leaf. I'm trying to make my parents happy again. If I do this, then I'm going to make them sad when they find out. They refused to give up. They told me I wouldn't need to steal anything. They said all they needed me to do was be on the lookout for them while they did the robbing. I thought about it and decided to give in. After all, I wasn't going to be robbing. I began to hang out with my friends again because we had to make plans for the operation. I was only 21 then. I would lie to my parents about wanting to take a walk. They were happy to see me trying to be healthy, and it made me feel guilty because I was lying to them. Instead of taking the walk, I would go to my friends. Being with them, I couldn't avoid smoking heavily. I would refuse the alcohol because I didn't want to get drunk, but I would smoke a lot. When I returned home, my parents were mostly already asleep or already in their rooms, so they never saw that I returned home very high. Eventually, the day of the robbery attack came. I was so nervous. My parents and siblings were away, as they'd gone to spend a week at my grandparents'. They wanted me to go with them, but I refused. I pretended to be busy with something important, so they let me meet them later. The day after they left home, I went with my friends to the bank where they were supposed to rob. When I arrived at the meeting place, my heart was racing. I had been told I was just there to help keep watch, but what happened next shocked me. One of my friends handed me a gun. I held it awkwardly. What am I supposed to do with this?
Are you going to watch out without any protection? What if the police come? You have to shoot at them if necessary. Be a man.
I was terrified. I didn't want to get involved in anything dangerous. I tried to argue, but my friends threatened to tell my parents everything I'd been up to since I returned from the police custody. I didn't want them to find out. So, reluctantly, I took the gun. We drove to the bank, and I felt a knot of fear in my stomach. We were all wearing masks and dark clothes. My heart was pounding, but I tried to act calm. I held the gun tightly, though it felt strange and heavy in my hands. Inside the bank, everything seemed to go according to plan. My friends were quick and efficient, and we took control of the situation. I stayed near the entrance, trying to stay out of the way, but still keep an eye on things. As we started to leave the bank, everything began to fall apart. I heard the distant sound of sirens, which grew louder and closer. Panic set in. I glanced back and saw police cars pulling up to the bank. Officers jumped out, their guns ready. Suddenly, there was chaos. One of my friends shouted at me to run. We started to sprint, but it was clear we were too late. The police were already closing in. I was frozen with fear. I didn't know what to do. The gun in my hand felt heavier and heavier. The police began firing. My friends tried to fight back, but they were outnumbered and overwhelmed. In a blind panic, I raised the gun and started shooting at the police. My hands were shaking and my shots were wild, but I could see the police officers falling. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized what I was doing. 2 officers went down, and the sight of their bodies made me feel even more terrified. Just as I was trying to escape, I felt a sharp pain in my back. I could hear the sounds of my friends crying out as they too were hit by police bullets. I looked around and saw them falling. I blacked out from the pain and fear. When I woke up, I was in an ambulance, lying on a stretcher. The pain in my back was intense, and I could barely move. The sirens were still blaring, and I was rushed to the hospital. The court hearings were absolutely heartbreaking. Apparently, I had killed some police officers. My lawyer tried to defend me, but it was clear that the evidence against me was overwhelming. The judge read out the charges and the sentences. I was sentenced to life in prison. While it was going on, the wife of one of the cops I'd killed attacked me. Security around tried to pull her away, but her grip was so tight.
You're so evil. He has 3 children. Where do I start from with them, you wicked thing? Why did you kill him?
All I could do was apologize to her. I felt my heart shatter as I saw the pain in her eyes. I felt nothing but pure hatred.
It's not fair. How could you take him from us? Our kids are still so young. Because of you, they're going to grow up without a father. Are you happy? Are you satisfied?
I began to cry too. I nearly fainted because everyone in the courtroom held nothing but hatred in their eyes for me. The crying woman in front of me made me regret every single bad action I made. The judge quickly read out the charges and the sentences. It was as if he wanted to get rid of me as fast as he could. I was sentenced to life in prison. I saw my parents crying silently. I knew I'd disappointed them in the worst way. As for the damage to my spine, it meant I would never fully recover. I was left with a broken body and a broken life.
I hope you know how much you've hurt us. You're going to make us live the rest of our lives wondering how we went wrong with you. I hope you know that.
I deeply regret having you as a child, Salim. That crying woman is going to live as a widow with 3 children who are now fatherless, all because of you. The other cop was the only son and the breadwinner of his family. I hope you know that you've damaged them by killing him. I couldn't stop crying. I tried to hold my mom, but she slapped my hands off. She only stared at me once more before leaving the courtroom. I cried loudly, begging for forgiveness, but everyone abandoned me. I deserved it. I still do. It's been 6 years since I've been in jail, yet I still have decades to go, depending on how long I live for. My parents never visited me. My older siblings only visited me twice to tell me how my end had affected my parents. The first time, I was told that my dad was battling depression and my mom's health was failing. The second time, I heard that they were better, but refused to let anyone ever speak about me. They'd canceled me and didn't want to hear even my name. I cry every day because I feel like a total failure. They gave me everything, and all they received was pain. I would give anything to go back in time and correct my actions, or even get a hug from my parents and see their smiles again. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel. It went on like that for weeks. He'd sneak up behind me, kick the back of my chair, hide things where I couldn't reach them, anything to make me feel helpless. The worst part was that no one else seemed to notice. My family laughed it off, saying it was just Hector being Hector. The worst of it happened when I was cleaning my house. I was busy and wasn't really paying attention, and suddenly Hector was behind me giggling like a fool. With one strong push, he tipped me out of my chair and dumped me onto the floor. Hector, what the hell is wrong with you? Hi, my name is Tony, and the day my life changed started just like any other. The road stretched out before me, my motorcycle humming underneath me. I loved the freedom of it, the wind, the open sky. I felt untouchable, until I wasn't. The crash was brutal. I remember the bike skidding, the feeling of my body slamming against the asphalt, and then, nothing. When I woke up, the doctor's face was there, delivering the news I didn't want to hear. My spine was broken. I'd never walk again. I would spend the rest of my life confined to a wheelchair. The first few weeks back home were surreal. Everything felt like it was wrapped in a fog, like I was watching my life from a distance. I kept waiting for the nightmare to end, but it never did. And then Hector came along and made it worse. Hector was my brother-in-law. He'd always been a jokester, the kind of guy who thought nothing was off limits. I'd never particularly liked him, but I tolerated him. I was married to his sister after all. But after the accident, he became relentless. The first time he came over, I was sitting in the living room, still trying to come to terms with my new reality. Hector walked in with his usual swagger, a smug grin on his face. Hey Tony, look at you, man. Finally found a way to slow you down, huh?
Yeah, I guess so. I tried to smile and take his words at face value, but something about his tone felt off. He sounded like he was enjoying seeing me in a wheelchair. I reached out and went to shake his hand, and as he grabbed my hand, he pulled me forward suddenly, nearly making me spill out of my chair.
Careful there. Wouldn't want you to take another spill.
I clenched my fists, but I let it go. He was family, after all. Maybe he didn't know how to deal with the situation, I told myself. Maybe he was just awkward. But then the prank started. One afternoon, I was in the backyard trying to enjoy the sun. Hector showed up, a mischievous glint in his eyes.
Hey, I'm sure my sister baths you like a child sometimes. You're disabled, and you're just a burden to her. Just divorce her and set her free.
What are you talking about?
Oh, nothing. Just that it'd be hard to do things yourself.
He grinned, and before I could react, he flicked a switch under my chair and disabled the motor. I was stuck. I tried to reach for the controls, but he'd locked the wheels somehow.
Hector, what the hell? Ha! Chill, Tony. I'm just messing with you. You'll figure it out.
He just walked away and went inside. It took me nearly an hour to get the chair working again. My hands were raw from trying to force the wheels, and by the time I finally made it back inside, I was shaking with rage. But Hector was gone, off to wherever he disappeared to, leaving me fuming in the empty house. The next time he came over, it was the same story. He snuck up behind me while I was in the kitchen, tying the wheels of my chair to the legs of the table. When I tried to roll back, I almost tipped over. Jesus, Hector, are you trying to kill me?
Hey, don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. Besides, it's not like you would have broken your back or anything. I mean, you already did that, which is how you ended up a cripple to begin with. Haha.
It's not funny. Why are you being such a jerk? It went on like that for weeks. He'd sneak up behind me, kick the back of my chair, hide things where I couldn't reach them, anything to make me feel helpless. The worst part was that no one else seemed to notice. My family laughed it off, saying it was just Hector being Hector. The worst of it happened when I was cleaning my house. I was busy and wasn't really paying attention, and suddenly Hector was behind me giggling like a fool. With one strong push, he tipped me out of my chair and dumped me onto the floor. Hector, what the hell is wrong with you?
I just came by because I thought maybe your chair needed a tune-up and oil change. Don't worry, I'll take into the shop for you. Later, buddy.
And then he left. I crawled over to the phone and managed to call my wife and ask her to get her insane brother to give me my chair back. She apologized and swore that she would, but I was stuck on the floor for hours until she finally showed up with it. Hector had taken it to the dump and was about to leave it there when she called and demanded that he hand it over to her. I was amazed that she wasn't more upset with him. Instead, she just shrugged and said that it was a prank that went a bit too far. That was it. I was done. I'd spent too long feeling sorry for myself, too long letting Hector walk all over me. I decided it was time for payback. I started small. I'd let him think he was getting to me, playing along with his stupid pranks, pretending to be annoyed. But all the while, I was planning something big. I knew Hector's routine. He'd come over on Saturdays. He'd lounge in Dad's old recliner, acting like he owned the place. So, one Saturday, I was ready. I'd rigged the chair so that when he sat down, it would collapse. Nothing too serious, just enough to knock him on his ass. Sure enough, he came in, grabbed a beer, and plopped down in the chair.
Hey, Tony, you ever get bored just sitting around all day? Maybe you should get up and go for a walk once in a while. Ha 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 ha.
Oh, shut up, you jackass!
Geez, I didn't think that sliding across the pavement from your accident would leave you with such thin skin. Aw, what the?
He tumbled to the ground and spilled beer all over himself as he did.
Did you do this, Tony?
Guess it just wasn't strong enough for you, Hector. Maybe you should lay off those donuts that you love to eat so much. He glared at me, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. For once, he was the one caught off guard. But that was just the beginning. The next time he came over, I made sure his beer was extra warm, sitting out in the sun for a few hours before I handed it to him. He made a face, spitting it out, and I couldn't help but laugh. Something wrong with your drink?
Real funny, Tony. Real mature.
Guess you're not the only jokester in the family. For weeks, I kept up the act. I'd hide his keys, move his things around, anything to throw him off balance. And he was getting angrier, more frustrated with each prank. He'd show up, edgy and tense, his eyes darting around like he was waiting for the next trap. One day, he finally snapped. He cornered me in the living room, his face flushed with anger.
All right, Tony, I've had enough. You think you're so clever, huh? Think you're some kind of tough guy now?
What's the matter, Hector? Can't take a little payback?
You think this is funny? You think you can mess with me?
I think you had it coming. I'm sick of your crap, Hector. You've been riding me ever since the accident, acting like I'm some kind of joke. But I'm done. You don't get to push me around anymore.
Oh yeah? Is that a fact?
You're damn straight it is. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. His face was twisted with rage, his body tense. But then he stopped, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at me.
You think you're some kind of hero now? You're still just a cripple, Tony. You're never going to be anything more than that.
The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my face flush with anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe I am, but at least I'm not a coward who needs to bully someone to feel tough. He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, I reached down and hit the control on my chair, rolling forward so fast that I knocked him off balance. He stumbled back, falling onto the floor with a thud. "Get out. I'm done with you, Hector. You're not welcome here anymore." It was then that he got up and stormed towards me with his fists raised. At the last second, I hit reverse on my wheelchair, and as he swung for me, he missed and caught off balance. He stumbled forward and fell with a sickening thud as his head hit my wooden coffee table. I felt so annoyed with him until I noticed that he wasn't getting up. He was out cold. I immediately called for an ambulance, and they took him away. A few days later, I got a call from my wife, giving me grief about goading Hector, and that it was my fault that he got injured. I, of course, didn't feel any remorse, especially not after the crap he had been putting me through since my own accident. But to keep the peace in the family, I told her that I would leave him alone from now on, so long as he did the same to me. I had to stifle a laugh, though, when she told me that his injuries were extremely severe and that he had lost some feeling and use of his legs. Apparently, his neck was injured in such a way that it damaged the nerves there, and he would need the assistance of a cane to walk for the rest of his life. It wasn't as severe as what I had experienced, but it felt like karma had paid him a visit. When his girlfriend heard of his current situation, she broke up with him. And now he struggles to take care of himself and go to work. Maybe I should feel bad about what happened, but honestly, I just feel like it was just desserts. What do you think? I had to drive faster. Luckily, I didn't get a ticket. By the time I finally made it back to my company, I was 1 minute late past the time I should have been there, and my boss was already in a meeting with the CEO and his team. "What the hell are you doing here so late?" "I'm sorry, I had an incident on the way to work and stopped to help a pregnant woman." "Those are just excuses for not doing your job properly. Why do I care if there was a pregnant woman asking for help? Weren't there other people to assist her? It seemed urgent. She was about to give birth. Others would have taken care of it. Or do you not see that our work is more important? Right now, you're going to pack your things and get out of my sight. You're fired." Hello, my name is Aaron, and even though it might be wrong for me to say, I am a person who never arrives late anywhere, much less to my job. This isn't because of a learned habit, nor is it because the telecommunications company I work for made it a mandatory requirement when signing the contract. Although, I will talk about this later, my boss did tend to be very strict about his employees' punctuality. My habit of always arriving early to places stemmed from a growing anxiety that had accompanied me since childhood. Therefore, if I had to be somewhere at a specific time, it was very normal for me to arrive up to 10 minutes early. This was a quality that benefited me when I was hired, because as I mentioned, my boss seemed to have a particular grudge against people who did not have the discipline to be in their respective offices on the dot. If one day you think about being late, or even worse, not showing up to work, you can excuse yourself from ever appearing at the office again, because you will be fired.
And what if we have an emergency?
There is no such thing as an emergency. If you really had to go somewhere, you would have informed us in advance.
That's why they're called emergencies.
The only way I would accept you not being on time is if you had a serious accident and were practically dead. And even then, I would want to see the corresponding medical documentation to verify your story before firing you. I can't have lazy people making up excuses to avoid covering their position. It wasn't just paranoia about being in the office fulfilling the schedule without any failure. My boss also seemed obsessed with adhering to a specific plan within those 8 working hours. For instance, the coffee break had to be at 11 o'clock sharp and couldn't last more than 10 minutes. If someone needed to go to the bathroom, it had to be between 1 and 3 in the afternoon, and it couldn't take more than 5 minutes on the clock. If someone exceeded the allotted time, even by a minute, the boss would go ballistic. He would scold the person for their lack of punctuality and decorum, claiming they were wasting everyone's time with that attitude. Besides scolding them, he would assign them more tasks or make their day more difficult. In the end, with this psychological mistreatment, most employees opted to stay seated at their desks and not risk taking breaks for fear of exceeding the established time.
Aaron, have you heard the latest news? It seems the CEO's sister is coming to visit the office next week.
Ah, is that why the boss is so stressed? He's been growling and breaking more things than usual these days.
Probably, you know how he gets every time the CEO comes to supervise. Imagine when he wants to bring visitors as well.
That day we'll have to be here an hour early to clean and practice military greetings, I can imagine. Who is this supposed CEO's sister anyway, and why does she have to come? As I was told, the lady in question was another successful entrepreneur who owned a very well-known cosmetics brand in the country. At the moment, she was on pregnancy leave. I couldn't remember well. The point was, she hadn't been working for a couple of months and would still be absent for the rest of the year. Her brother, the CEO of this company, and my boss's immediate superior, had invited her to take a look at the office, as they had recently renovated one of the floors and wanted to show it to her. Anyway, I wasn't interested. We all had to keep striving to meet our goals with or without visits. I didn't expect that a week later, while on my way to work, I would be involved in an unfortunate traffic accident. Fortunately, there were no injuries beyond the scare, and a few scratches for several drivers. But because a car ran a red light, several vehicles were involved in a minor collision in the city center. I was unscathed, and although my car wasn't as lucky, with a dented hood, it was still in good enough condition to get me to my office in time for my next shift. On another occasion, I would have stayed to fill out the corresponding report, but since I didn't want to get another scolding and possibly be fired by my boss, I thought it best to leave immediately. I would deal with the damages caused by the accident after my workday. However, I didn't count on another setback interrupting me before I could leave. One other person involved in the accident was a pregnant lady, and she called out,
Excuse me, could you help me get to the hospital? I'm in labor and I don't think the ambulance will arrive in time to take me there.
Isn't there anyone else who can take you? I'm already late for work, and...
Please, the hospital is just a couple of blocks away. I would go myself, but because of the accident, my car has a flat tire and it's impossible to move it.
Okay, I'll take you. But I'll only stay long enough to make sure you're attended to. I genuinely believed that if I hurried, I would make it to work just in time. But I was wrong. The traffic accident, which involved a dozen vehicles, caused a major traffic jam, making it an arduous task to reach the nearest hospital, to the point that by the time we arrived at its doors, I had completely abandoned the idea of being at my workstation on time. And, since I had given up that idea, I stayed at the hospital a while longer, accompanying the woman until her husband arrived and took over. We exchanged cards, and I left. I had to drive faster. Luckily, I didn't get a ticket. By the time I finally made it back to my company, I was 1 minute late past the time I should have been there, and my boss was already in a meeting with the CEO and his team. What the hell are you doing here so late? I'm sorry, I had an incident on the way to work and stopped to help a pregnant woman. Those are just excuses for not doing your job properly. Why do I care if there was a pregnant woman asking for help? Weren't there other people to assist her? It seemed urgent. She was about to give birth. Others would have taken care of it. Or do you not see that our work is more important? Right now, you're going to pack your things and get out of my sight. You're fired. I wanted to protest because my boss had not only fired me unfairly, it was the first time I was late to my job, and for a completely reasonable reason, but he had also yelled at and humiliated me in front of more than 30 people who were there with him at the time. But I concluded that it wasn't worth it. Perhaps it was better to accept my dismissal and look for another job where I wouldn't have to put up with a toxic boss giving orders all the time. And yes, I ended up going to my office to collect my things and leave. I didn't expect that a few hours after I left, the CEO of the company would call me to his office to discuss a private matter that supposedly concerned me, even though I had already quit my job.
You see, Natalie, the woman you helped get to the hospital, is my sister. She showed me your card when I went to visit her.
How? That's quite a coincidence.
It is. She was on leave from work due to her pregnancy, as the doctors said it was a high-risk pregnancy and recommended that she rest as much as possible. It's a good thing she found you during the traffic accident, because with the traffic and services overwhelmed, she probably wouldn't have made it to the hospital in time.
I'm sure she would have found someone to help her. It was all a fortunate coincidence, and I'm glad it turned out well.
Be that as it may, I've called you in to reward you for your good deed.
Apparently, when my boss scolded me in front of everyone and fired me, the CEO had wanted to intervene to stop him from firing me. But he couldn't, because at that very moment, he was called by the hospital to inform him that his sister was admitted and he had to leave immediately. Now, a day after the incident, the CEO had called me to thank me for accompanying his sister, who could have died if I hadn't hurried to get her to the hospital when I did. And furthermore, the CEO wanted to rehire me at the company, only this time in a higher position. My boss would take my previous position, and I would take control of that part of the company, able to boss my former boss around as much as I wanted. Or, well, that should be the dream of any employee who suffered abuse from any superior. The truth is, in my case, I didn't even have to try hard to make things difficult for my ex-boss, as he constantly violated the most basic rules and had an arrogant attitude, typical of someone who didn't think he had done anything wrong to receive such unfavorable treatment at work. It can't be. I've been demoted from my position unjustly. And why? Just for demanding a minimum of punctuality. You should discuss that with the CEO. I'm in charge now, and I've asked you to make some photocopies. I'm not interested in your problems with the CEO. You're not interested? Well, you sure have taken advantage of it, and I'm not going to make any photocopies. That's what these other workers are for. I have more important things to do. My ex-boss turned out to be such a problematic employee, refusing to do tasks or doing them in the crudest way, that I even wondered how he had managed to get the position of boss. I talked to the CEO, and it turns out my ex-boss was in his position because his father had been a man of money and power, who had probably put him there as a favor. But that favor was about to end because it was impossible for someone with such an attitude to remain in the company. Having obtained the CEO's blessing, I made sure to fire my ex-boss. He didn't take it well, throwing one of his tantrums where he shouted and even destroyed office equipment. The police had to come to take him away, and he was arrested for causing a disturbance at our workplace, destroying private property, and even trying to assault me. Thanks to my ex-boss being taken to jail and finally fired from the company, many people were encouraged to speak out and share the bad experiences they had with him at work. A collective lawsuit was then filed for multiple abuses, and in the end, my ex-boss was sentenced to 4 years in prison. We later heard that just months into his time in prison, he was complaining about the food and insulting the guards. They ended up starving him for 2 days, and he has become so pale. Just last week, we received information that my ex-boss tried to separate a fight between some gang members in prison, but they both turned on him and beat him so badly that he got a black eye. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying, "I subscribed," and we will try our best to reply to your comment.
We hugged and she poured me a glass of wine. I wanted her to drink too, but she said she would after I finished mine. Well, barely a minute after I emptied the glass, I began to feel dizzy. I turned to my mother-in-law and caught her smiling. Then I knew something was wrong. I watched her stand up and go lock the door. Quickly, I turned on the location of my phone and pushed the phone into my bra. Afterward, I passed out. My mother-in-law went upstairs and packed some of my things. She packed the clothes to make it seem like I left on my own. When Paolo returned home, he was shocked to find the house empty and some of my things gone. I met Paolo when I was in my lowest state. It was the time when I'd just lost my dad and younger brother in a plane crash. Hello, my name is Charlotte. My mom died immediately after my birth, so I didn't know her. My dad and brothers have taken care of me ever since. I had 2 older brothers who were 5 and 3 years older than me, while my younger brother was 5 years younger than me. He was the son of the woman my dad remarried, Marie. Marie didn't let me miss the warmth of a mother for too long. Once she came into our lives, it was like she was our biological mother. She showered love on us and cared for us so much, so we loved her son like he was fully our brother. My dad and elder brothers spoiled me silly. Of course, Marie did too, but theirs were top. I went to a great school and I never lacked anything. I was very much loved at home. 2 months after my college graduation, my dad was already speaking to his friends to get me a great place to work. At first, he didn't want me to start working just yet, but after I complained nonstop, he finally gave in. One of his friends found me a spot that wouldn't require me to move too much, and I was so happy. I was to resume in the coming month. My dad and younger brother had traveled for a fashion show a week before my resumption day, and on their way there, the plane crashed, and they both died in it. It was a tough period for me. I was depressed and utterly dejected. My older brothers tried to comfort me and my stepmom, but they were also greatly affected by the deaths. The house grew quiet. I couldn't resume work because I needed to mourn my dad and brother. Luckily, the company didn't mind. They knew my dad, and were also saddened by his death. It was a month after his funeral that I finally resumed work at the company. I hadn't gotten over their death, but my stepmom wasn't any better. and I knew I needed to join my older brothers and be strong for her. On my way back from work every day, I would get her favorite snacks and ensure she ate them. My brothers would bring her flowers every day. The maids also took care of her greatly and ensured there was always someone with her. One day, while at work, I suddenly came across a picture of my brother on my phone, and I broke into tears. I quickly rushed out of my office and went to the restroom to cry. I didn't check which restroom I entered. It turned out that I'd gone into the male restroom. While I was crying, someone suddenly offered me a handkerchief and patted my back gently while I kept crying, until I couldn't cry any longer. He asked what the issue was, and I told him. I could see the sadness in his eyes. He hugged me and assured me that I was going to be fine. I couldn't be more grateful to him as we walked out of the restroom. We exchanged contacts and became friends. As time passed, my mom slowly began getting out of her shell. She got a job at the company my dad worked at before. The CEO absolutely loved my dad. My dad had been his first employee and had helped the CEO take the company to the level it was. As a result, the CEO employed my mom as his personal assistant. He already had one, but he wanted my stepmom to have a spot that would require her to not do anything. All she had to do was show up once a week. It was his way of repaying my dad for his good deeds. Well, as time went on, Paolo and I got closer. Feelings soon grew, and we began dating. I introduced him to my family a few months after we began dating. My brothers and stepmom connected with him quickly. Paolo was a good man, so it wasn't hard to be charmed by his niceness. Since I'd introduced him to my family, I was eager to meet his family too. Paolo seemed to also be eager because 2 weeks later, we were at his parents' house. We were received by his younger sister. With the way she hugged me after Paolo introduced me, I knew he'd talked about me to them, and that made me happy. When we got into the house, we settled on the couch, and his sister quickly went to get his parents. Paolo looked just like his father. The man had a pleasant smile on his face, but I noticed that his mom was frowning as she came to sit. Paolo introduced me to them, and his father seemed even happier. He expressed his excitement to finally meet me as, according to him, Paolo had talked about me every chance he got. His mother was silent throughout. Noticing it, I spoke to her. Hi, ma'am. It's nice to finally meet you. Paolo has told me a lot about you, especially how beautiful you are. I can't deny, you're even more beautiful than I imagined.
Oh, please shut up. What? You think you can charm me with your stupid words? I'm not Paolo, okay? You silly thing.
I was both shocked and confused. What had I done to deserve that? I didn't say anything bad. Neither did I do anything bad.
Mom, you're being disrespectful, and this is unlike you. Charlotte has been so eager to meet you all, and you disrespect her like this?
Yes, because it's what she deserves. She's nothing but a pretender and a prostitute. My son can't marry such a girl over my dead body. He's my only son, for God's sake. He deserves someone richer and more beautiful.
Excuse me? Ma'am, I don't appreciate you using such words with me.
Oh, but isn't it what you are? Look at your tattoos and nose ring. How does that make you any better than street workers?
Shut up, Cecilia. You're being so ridiculous. Tattoos and piercings have nothing to do with one's personality. I can't believe you're saying this, Mom. I feel so ashamed and embarrassed.
The woman didn't stop. She kept calling me all sorts of derogatory names until Paolo took me out of the house. As we left, I heard his father and sister yelling at her. I cried all through the ride home. I felt so angry and embarrassed. Paolo couldn't stop apologizing. I could tell that he was angry too, and that made me feel bad too because I'd made his whole family angry just the first time they met me. I told Paolo how I was feeling, and he quickly killed those thoughts and assured me that I wasn't wrong in any way, and that it was his mother who was completely wrong. He told me how much his mother loved him, and she was scared of losing him to a girl who won't love him like she did, and she will often reject all the girls he will bring home for one reason or another. He promised to get her to apologize to me, but that didn't happen. I visited again, but the woman only did worse. This time, she didn't stop laughing at me. Whenever I said anything, she would burst out laughing and say terrible things. I got embarrassed again and left before Paolo. After I reached home, I sent him a breakup text. I couldn't deal with his mother disrespecting me like that. It was too much to swallow. Paulo came to my house, but I refused to see him. For 2 whole weeks, I avoided him like a plague. Well, until my brothers and stepmother spoke to me.
He loves you, Charlotte. He comes here every day. Yesterday, he looked so tired and down, yet he waited for 2 hours, hoping you would agree to see him. Talk things out with him, please.
It took a lot of begging from them before I finally agreed to see him if he came again. Unfortunately, I got a call that night that Paulo had been admitted after he fainted in his office. I immediately rushed there and saw that he had been treated and was asleep. His sister was there and she rushed to me as I walked in, hugging and begging me to forgive her brother. I told her I'd forgiven him and asked her to go home and rest. She thanked me and left. I stayed with Paulo until he woke up, which was the next morning. As soon as he saw me, he began apologizing. I hushed him and told him I forgave him. Well, we went back to dating, but I didn't visit his house again. I called his dad quite often, and his sister always visited me, but I refused to see his mom. Time passed, and it was soon our wedding day after Paulo proposed to me 3 months back. His mother was in attendance, and I caught her laughing at me countless times, but I didn't say anything. I refused to let her ruin my wedding. His sister saw her too, which made her mouth an apology to me every time, but I simply smiled at her to show that I wasn't angry, even though I was. Well, 2 months after Paulo and I got married, she suddenly showed up at my front door. I was surprised to see her. She asked if I wanted to have a drink and a discussion, and even though I felt a bit skeptical about it, I agreed. She came in and pulled out a bottle of wine from her bag.
This is a special wine that was given to me by my mother. I was meant to drink it with my daughter-in-law on her engagement night. I feel ashamed to be here now because I've been nothing but bad to you.
I was shocked.
I'm sorry, Charlotte. You're a good girl, and I'm the bad person for hating you over your tattoos and piercings. Forgive me, please.
I was moved to tears. I loved the woman so much, and all I ever wanted was an apology from her. We hugged, and she poured me a glass of wine. I wanted her to drink too, but she said she would after I finished mine. Well, barely a minute after I emptied the glass, I began to feel dizzy. I turned to my mother-in-law and caught her smiling. Then I knew something was wrong. I watched her stand up and go lock the door. Quickly, I turned on the location of my phone and pushed the phone into my bra. Afterward, I passed out. My mother-in-law went upstairs and packed some of my things. She went to keep them in her car before dragging me out of the house and into her car. She packed the clothes to make it seem like I left on my own. When Paulo returned home, he was shocked to find the house empty and some of my things gone. He called my phone non-stop, but I didn't pick up because it was on silent mode and I was still unconscious. The next day, after I was still not home or answering my call, my husband went to the cops to report me missing. Paulo, my stepmother, brother, father-in-law, and sister-in-law were all scared and worried. Luckily, they were able to connect to my location using Paulo's phone, and they found where I was. All this time, my mother-in-law was pretending to be worried too. My mother-in-law found my phone on me, realized the cops would track it and discover my location, and quickly put me in her car and drove off. Luckily, the cops followed her without her knowing. She drove to the mountainside and dragged me on the floor to the top of the mountain. Just before she could push me off, the cops came. She wasn't scared, so she pushed me. But she got shot in the back at the same time she pushed me, which led to her falling with me. We were both rushed to the hospital. Fortunately for me, the fall wasn't severe, so my injuries were mild. However, my mother-in-law got a broken spine from the gunshot and a permanently fractured knee from the fall. As a result, she had to go to jail on a wheelchair. Her daughter and husband didn't feel bad for her. According to her daughter, she was limited to so many things because of her mother's judgmental attitude and didn't have a nice relationship with the woman. Both my husband and his family kept apologizing to me even after I told them I held no grudges against them. As for my mother-in-law, imagine life in a horrible jail while being on a wheelchair. She lived a terrible life there, and she deserved it. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.